Ready?
Nope. Ready? 3, 2, 1, and go. We are live.
Hi, folks. Welcome. It's been a while. We last had live during our class in July. Anyway, we are back. Back and ready to answer your questions. I'll explain a little more as we go, but I'll go ahead and take the first question.
All right.
Frick, please.
Okay, first question comes from Michael Riggs in Salsa, Oklahoma.
Hey, Michael.
He says, why wouldn't... The topic is sharpening. Did you mention that? Topic is
Well,
sharpening.
we weren't sure.
Yeah.
There was some conflicting
Well,
information.
the questions that were sent in are sharpening based. Anyway, he says, why wouldn't you sharpen your plane blade with the chip breaker still attached for equal pressure across the tip of the blade?
Why wouldn't you sharpen your plane blade with the chip breaker attached for equal pressure across the tip of the blade? Well, you have to do the backside to get rid of the burr, and you could do that. You could do that with your hand. If you're talking an old style, meaning a Stanley, those blades were really thin, and they could have used the support. If you're talking about anything new that has at least an 1/8 inch blade, 1/8 inch thick, then it doesn't need the support of the chip breaker in order to hold its shape. But you could do that, Jake. The question was, why don't you just leave the chip breaker on when you sharpen your blade? I'm curious enough. I'm going to try it. Huh? Well, you don't really. You just have to remove the burr, and you could do that. Strop that with a piece of wood or.
Well, you don't want to slur.
Oh yeah. You know what? I'm not going to do it. That's a good answer. Yeah, if you're lubricating your stones with water, even with hone right, you don't want moisture up in there, and that would surely happen. If you're doing oil stones, it wouldn't be a big deal. But even then, now you got oil up underneath there, and that's going to congregate or allow dust to congregate and create gunk. So to keep it clean, that's the best answer. Here you go, Michael. Next one, Frick.
This one comes from Lincoln in Barbados.
Lincoln in Barbados.
He says, if you have the 300/1000 diamond stone, is it really necessary to have the 16,000 stone to finish, or would an 8,000 be good enough? Asking, as the price jump is quite a bit to the 16,000 versus the 8,000.
Well, it actually, it really isn't if you think about it this way. An 8,000 grit stone, which is the same thickness as a 16,000, which means they're going to last the same amount of time, and I'm going to get, let's say they only last you 5 years. The 8,000 grit stone, I think, is $110.
I'll correct you if you're wrong.
And the 16,000 is $150. So it's $40 more, potentially less. I think it might actually be $115. How much?
100 for 8,000.
Oh, 100. So it's $50 difference. So $50 spread out over 5 years is $10 a year, less than $1 a month. Hardly even worth talking about. The way I used to do it when I would do the wood show, when I was doing the wood show circuit, I would take a piece of maple, and I'd make it so that it was about that wide, and I would plane one edge with a blade sharpened 8,000. And then resharpen the blade to 16,000 and plane the other edge, and just have people run their thumb and forefinger up and down, say, which surface do you want? So it was quite apparent. So yes, I would spend the money. If you're going to get a finishing stone, I would spend the money and get the 16, by all means. Frick, next one, please.
Yeah, this one comes from Dave in Mifflinville, Pennsylvania. He says, would you please review when the Charlesworth ruler trick is appropriate and when it's not, related to plane blades? Should it be used only in bevel down applications, or is it also okay for bevel up uses such as block and rabbet planes?
The only plane that you don't use the Charlesworth ruler trick on is a scrub plane. Applicable in every application outside of that. Shoulder plane, rabbet plane, skew block plane, bench plane, bevel up, bevel down, doesn't matter. It's less than a degree So the back bevel that you're applying is less than 1 degree, which means it's not changing the geometry of the cut to a point where anybody could ever tell the difference. So absolutely. And the argument for it is, why would you want to polish? I'll take this blade as an example because it doesn't have it. Why would you want to polish all of that surface? You can't, if you don't use the ruler trick and you do the back like a chisel, you're going to polish at least to my finger. You're spending all this time and material, talking about the cost of a stone, and yet you're only going to use right there. So if you put that against setting that down on your stone, elevating it, the thickness of the steel rule, just so you only polish a little wee strip right out at the end. Smartest thing ever devised when it comes to sharpening that I know of. So always use the ruler trick. And I'll throw a few precautions in. You always want to use the same ruler so that you're not changing the elevation, which is going to just give you more work. You always want to keep it flush with the side of the stone, opposite edge of the stone that you're using to sharpen with. You want to stay within 1/4 of an inch of that opposite edge with the blade edge so that you're not altering the bevel substantially. And. Lots of fingers. Or I shouldn't say lots of fingers because I use 3, but light to moderate pressure. You don't have to stand on it. And once you've created the bevel, then it's just 3 seconds of removing the burr. It's really easy. There's a fellow plane maker in Canada, and he and I sat in the Heathrow airport one time, coming back from a wood show over there, arguing for and against the ruler trick. And my response to him was, talking about starting with a new blade, you spend an hour and a half to get your brand new blade ready to go. I spend 4 to 5 minutes, first time around, and we get the same result on the board. Why would you ever not use it? So yeah, big fan. David Charles Earth's biggest contribution probably to hand tool woodworking was his ruler trick. May he rest in peace. Next, Frick.
Michael in College Point, New York.
Hey, Michael.
Should you sharpen a router plane like a chisel or as a standard plane blade, ruler trick or not?
A router plane?
Like a
yeah.
Like a chisel?
I sharpen the router plane like a chisel. The back, it's too small. You got a little wee tiny back. So I prep that just like a chisel. I use secondary and tertiary to sharpen the bevel, but keep the back just like a chisel, just because of the size. It's so tiny. By the way, so what we're doing is, this is our YouTube Live that we normally do every second Saturday night. And we do this in support of our Purple Heart project, which is a series of 6 hand tool workshops that occur each year, 1 a month, from April to October, minus August. Each class has 14 students. 7 of them are scholarship students that are combat wounded veterans that have applied and been accepted because of their condition due to being in combat, whether it's a physical wound or a mental wound, does not matter. We bring them from all over the world. We've had them as far away as Australia, Denmark, and Ireland. Most are from America, the United States, and Canada. We cover all their expenses, their airfare. We take care of their lodging, feed them. Every vet goes home with an American dollars, $4,000 worth of premium tools, like what you see behind me. And thanks to the Bench Brigade, we have a bench custom built for them and delivered to their home so that they can continue to do this. It's an expensive venture, but it's an important one, and it's worth doing. So we have a lot of folks that want to be able to participate. They want to be able to give back, and the easiest way to do it is financially. It allows us to steer the resources in the direction that we need, thanks to Luther Sheely, retired Colonel Luther Sheely. Spent a year and managed to obtain a 501c3 charitable organization, or whatever it's called, status in the United States as of last December. So your donations can be tax deductible. And we'll have that same status in Canada sometime soon. What else do I need to tell you? I'll just throw that off in bits and pieces. Oh, we give away prizes. So for every $1,000 that we raise, and you're welcome to donate. Frick will put the link on there. We've got a couple of unique prizes tonight. So this is a really nice leather apron that was made by a wounded vet in Maine. He does a lot of leather work, and he sent that up. And sorry for the dust. It's been sitting around. We've been showing people off. So it's got the PHP logo on there, and actually there's a little state of Maine that he's very proud of. I think it might even have his business name on there, does it?
Yeah.
Great. What's it say? Story Works? Jake?
I think so.
Great Story Works. Really nice, heavy duty. That'll be one prize we'll give away. Another one we have down here. Oh, there's three. So this is a large walnut cutting board made by Dave Demir down in Florida. Has the Purple Heart Project logo on the base. It's got nice feet on it. It's got a juice groove all the way around. Jake, it just left me. Who did the apron? Rick Elder, right. Rick was very kind. He in our last class, one of the vets, actually my assistant, who was a previous vet from a class, his flight got canceled, and Rick was kind enough to pick him up the next day and bring him up to Maine, or bring him up to the border for us. Big shout out to you for that, Rick. And Jesse Rufiange did this charcuterie board that he sent in, and we'll give this one away. This is maple and walnut. And of course we have Moose here, and we always give away 3 Dead Cat sweaters to keep everybody warm. Now that you're back, Rick, can we have another question?
Did you explain the new saws? A couple people are asking about them.
Ask the question and I'll tell you.
Well, I just said, can you tell us more about them?
Oh, yeah, I can even demonstrate them.
We'll save that to the end.
Yeah, let's wait.
Say what?
We'll wait for
Let's
that.
wait.
All right.
Here's
We're
a
waiting.
good one.
Here's
For
a
a
good-
new guy wanting to give it a try, but also wanting to maximize cost, what brand or brands of planes would you start with that would still provide the best chance for a positive experience?
So you're brand new. Did he say he's not quite convinced he wants to do it? He just wants to give it a try?
He said, give it a try, but also maximizing cost. So he doesn't want to spend $500 and get a Lee Nielsen.
Okay, well, I can help you with that real easy. Stay away from the hardware stores. It reminds me of Super Dave and his Cobalt plane. That's how we met. So what you're going to find in the big box stores is, call it what it is, junk. It's so far from being being able to be used that, and if you're new to this, you're not going to know what to do. And even if you were someone that knew what to do, most of the parts a good number of the parts are going to need to be replaced or remanufactured. So that's not fair. Wood River, I've said it since we went to work with them back in 2008. Wood River represents the best value. I think Lee Nielsen makes the best plane, but Wood River represents the best value. For the money you're spending, you're getting as good a plane as you could ask for. The difference between a Lee Nielsen and Wood River, the Lee Nielsen is a little finer finished, but the actual performance of the plane is not going to vary from one to the other. I would buy a 5.5, which is going to cost you in the U.S. how much? 200? They went up. 210?
For Wood River 5.5?
Yeah.
You're 280.
280. I've been behind that. I've been behind the times. $280. That may sound like a lot, but if you spend $75 on a new Stanley, you're going to waste your $75. So there is no that such thing as a cheap, good plane.
Sorry, they're 300.
They're 300 now. Well, you should have bought it when I first mentioned it. So was that question limited to just planes?
Yeah, it says brand.
Yeah. Yeah, buy a Wood River 5.5. You'll be happy. And the nice thing is you won't have to replace it if you decide, yeah, I love this, I want to do more. So 5.5. I can't think of anything. I wouldn't even go out and buy an old Stanley off of eBay thinking that you're going to get a really good plane, because you're going to want to replace the blade first thing, and that's going to cost you $60. And then there's a lot of work to be done to bring it up to snuff, and that's usually not something that a new person's going to do successfully. And I say that because if you've never used a good sharp hand plane, how do you evaluate when you're there in the sense of, I'm going to go and repair this, I'm going to upgrade it, I'm going to make it work better. How do I know when I'm there if I don't even know what there looks like? Well, there's a long answer. Next one, Crick, please.
All right, next one comes from Nils in the chat.
Nils?
He's from France.
Ah, bonjour.
He says, I try
to throw a little French in there once in a while.
Yeah. I try to get better in sharpening by hand with your good advice. Inevitably, I raise the angle for the secondary bevel on my plane blades getting above 45 degrees. Any advice?
Yep, go to your grinder. Go to your grinder and create a new secondary bevel, a new primary bevel. Once you've elevated beyond, I'll explain this in case there's people that don't understand. Once you have elevated beyond 45 degrees, and the magic number 45 degrees is what your frog is. So on a bench plane, traditional bench plane, the bevel's on the bottom side, so the blade sits there like that at 45 degrees. Once you go above 45 degrees, when you're sharpening, now the heel is going to touch instead of the toe, and it won't work. So the only way to correct it is to create a new primary bevel. Stay at 25 degrees, don't go to 30. That'll give you more leeway. I'll take this apart and show you. Jake, any idea where my fancy doodah screwdriver is?
No.
Why can I not keep these in my possession?
Is there one on the tool tray?
No. No, there isn't.
We should do a session on organizing.
We already did that. I didn't like it. So here's your blade. Whoa, if I got either a serious nick on this or a bit of rust. You got a brand new primary bevel on there, 25 degrees. So the first thing you want to make sure you're not doing is holding the blade too firmly. You just have a nice, light, comfortable grip. So you're going to set that on there until you can feel that primary bevel. And the nice thing about a thick blade is it gives you a wide primary bevel. Jake, are they able to see? So that you can easily locate it. So there's my 25 degrees. Now 45 degrees, just for the heck of it, let's use this. So if there's my 25, and there's 45. So see if I can do it this way. 45 is way up there. 25 is way down there. That's a lot. So there's no reason really why you should ever come anywhere near that 45. All you want to do is get off of the 25 degree so I don't have to polish all of this. So I find my 25, come up just a little bit. Do your 10 seconds on your 1000 grit stone. Do small circles. The bigger circles you go, the more you have a tendency to rock like this. As soon as you get a burr, Then you're going to come over to your 16,000 grit stone. That's a 6. Somewhere in here I have a 16. That's a 30,000. We'll pretend it's a 16. Then you're going to come over to your 16,000. There's your primary. So you're up to here on your secondary. Go back to your primary, come up just a little bit higher, but you're nowhere near 45 degrees. Just takes a little bit of practice, but just stay close to your 25 and you shouldn't have a problem. But not hard to correct. You just have to go to your grinder, create a new primary bevel, and start again. Next, Frick.
This one comes from Daniel in Ireland.
Hey, Daniel.
It says, hi, Rob and gang. My sharpening question is in regards to hand saw sharpening. With the recent introduction of the Cosman panel saws, does Rob have any plans to produce quality saw sets and files so that we can keep these saws and back saws working like new?
Well, that's a very good question. The first thing we're going to do, I'm working on it right now, is coming up with a vise. We already have the files. Jake found those, what, a year ago? 2 years ago?
Yeah.
And they're made by Carbide. Really good files, nice sharp corners. We got that covered. A saw set. You can buy a saw set that'll work on the handsaw. They're not hard to find. Finding a saw set small enough for the dovetail saw is a different story. We've talked about that actually with Chris designing that. So there's a good chance that that's somewhere in the works as well. So your answer is yeah. The answer to your question is yes. We are working on that. We've got most of what you need now. Next, Frick.
Clifford in South Africa wants to know if the back of a chisel needs to be perfectly flat, and if so, why?
Well, in order for your edge to be as good as it can on a chisel, like any cutting edge that has two surfaces meeting, the bevel and the back, where they meet produces the cutting edge. And you have to polish both to the same level in order to get it in order to avoid having one less than the other, which would end up being as good as your edge could be. If your back is nice and flat, you'll be able to polish both to the same level and make your edge as good as it can be. If that back is not flat, that becomes a very difficult thing to do. If you can imagine sitting at a chisel on a stone that's not flat, you lay it like that, the actual cutting edge is not touching on the back side. So you want to keep it nice and flat. And that's just a matter of being very cautious when you're doing it, making sure that your pressure is distributed evenly across the stone. Now the question, why do it? Well, it makes it very predictable. And by that I mean when you're using the chisel, and you're coming in and you're trying to engage the wood. Remind me to tell you a little bit about Super Dave's urn. Just going to move it. If you have to do something that requires you to be able to pair with your chisel, you want it to be predictable. Now this needs to be sharpened, but what I mean by predictable is I should be able to engage right there. If I have to lift to try to find the engagement point, well, now I don't have any guide. I'm literally working on, if you were to try to measure the surface area that's making contact with the wood, when I'm having to sit up here in midair somewhere, there isn't anything. So there really is no guide. Whereas if the back of the chisel is nice and flat and allows me to engage right there, now I've got a nice surface for reference that'll enable me to carefully guide the cutting edge and makes it a lot more effective, makes it a lot more predictable. The other thing is when you're chopping a dovetail and you're coming down into your wood, if your chisel back is straight, you know exactly where the chisel is going to go. If it's got a shape like this to it, as you start chopping, it's wanting to veer off like that, which is going to make it difficult to keep the space between the pins, that socket, nice and flat. It's just very difficult to work. You want it to be nice and flat, accurately flattened. It makes it far more predictable, so much easier to use. Next, it's like building a piece of furniture. If everything is straight and square, it's a heck of a lot easier to build it. But when pieces are out by 2 or 3%, then it becomes extremely difficult. So straight and square, and sharp and flat backs on chisels, if you can put a correlation there. Next, Rick.
Sue B.
Sue B in Florida.
She'd like to know if you can demonstrate your jig for sharpening a card scraper.
I can do that. How's our audience?
366.
How many?
366.
So I'm going to do, so I'm going to demonstrate card scraper jigs, and I'm going to demonstrate the saws. You want to save it for just a little bit? We'll do it on the half hour, or on the hour?
Sure.
Okay. I will, Sue.
Ross in the chat says, for sharpening, which is better, a honing jig or sharpening by hand?
Well, sharpening by hand. If you have to, if I did use a honing jig, it was a long time ago. The downside to using a honing jig is losing it. I'm not the type that tends to clean things off after I'm done. So if you're like that, finding the honing jig, cleaning it off, resetting it, and just going through that whole process. But that's only a side issue. The main issue is this. We do this because we want to enjoy, we enjoy developing the skills that we can put to work and then stand back and admire when we're done. If you sharpen with the jig and 10 years down the road, your jig breaks, you still don't know how to sharpen. You've got to go find another jig, and hopefully you can find the same one. Whereas if you learn to do it freehand, it's a skill you now can put into your kit of skills. It's quick, very quick. Sharpening time is 32 seconds, as we like to say in our video, but that's literal. A chisel resharpening is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 seconds. It takes me that long just to go find a flat spot if I was using a jig to work on, that is. So yeah, by all means, develop the skill. You'll never regret it. Next, Rick.
Michael Dodo in the chat. He says, which plane blades do you camber on the outside edges?
Well, just in case your terminology is not the same as what I consider. So a camber, and David Charlesworth was a fan of this. I'm more in the Ian Kirby camp. So a camber would be a radius on your blade from edge to edge. So it's not straight, it's got a slight radius like this. The idea is when you plane a flat board, you're scalloping it, you're creating little waves like this that you then come in and sand away the little high spots in between each pass. But a high spot's easier to get rid of than a divot caused by a straight blade with undressed corners, and that would leave what we would call plane track. I prefer to do what Ian Kirby taught me. Keep your blade edge straight corner to corner, but in the very outside corners, you create a little feathering, and you do that by simply applying some downward pressure. I'll show you this. On your final stone only, never on anything coarser. I hold the blades like this, so I've got 4 fingers along the cutting edge, which means I've got it the pressure is well distributed. After I've gone through and I've created my tertiary bevel on my final stone, at the end of the 10 seconds, I put downward pressure with this finger, downward pressure, a little more than the rest of the fingers have, for 3 seconds. Then I switch and I put downward pressure with my left pinky, extra pressure, for 3 seconds. And what that does is create a very light feathering on the outside corners, such that when you plane a wide surface, your and it's a very shallow pass. A light pass on a wide surface will result in a shaving that has no distinct either outside edge. And that will allow one pass to blend into the next, and you don't find that demarcation. There is no plane track. That's what I refer to as feathering. I stay away from the word camber because camber is more to do with the overall shape of the blade from side to side. I'm keeping my blade straight almost to either end, and then just a light drop off or light feathering. Okay, next, Rick.
Next one comes from Alfred Borg in Melbourne, Australia.
What's his first name?
Alfred Borg.
Alfred?
Yeah.
In Melbourne.
Yeah. He says, "Good day,
Alfred.
Good day, Robin team.
Good day.
I picked up a box of old
I speak
planes.
a little Australian too." What? Say that again?
I picked up a box of old planes, and there was a scraper plane there. The back of the blade is sawtooth. How would you flatten that?
You picked up a bunch of old planes. One was a scraper plane. The back of the blade was a sawtooth.
Is sawtooth. How would you flatten that?
Sawtooth. I didn't know. Well, maybe they did make it on a scraper blade. I knew they did on a plain blade. And it's okay. So tell me the last sentence, please.
The back of the blade is sawtooth. How would you flatten it?
How would I flatten the back?
I can't make heads or tails of his question.
No, I'm having a problem with it too. Scraper blade is going to be relatively thin. I prepare a scraper blade the same way I prepare a plain blade. I use the ruler trick on that. Same idea. You're only using the actual cutting edge, so why would you polish a whole bunch of it? So if the blade is thick enough, back to talking about the ruler trick. Difficult somewhat on thin blades, like Stanley blades were sometimes as little as 75 thousandths of an inch thick. And if you do the math on that, 75 thou, sheet of paper is 4 thou, so however many sheets of paper in 75 thou is not a lot. There's not a lot of metal there, and it deflects under your fingertips even. So there's a huge advantage to having thick blades. If your scraper blade is one of those thin ones, it's going to be a little bit difficult to do the ruler trick, but I would still try it as opposed to going in and flattening all of that back. But I'm not 100% sure that we've got grasping exactly what you're asking. So if I didn't, you want to throw another one in there, we'll try it again. Next, Rick.
Michael Dodo, just back to his question about the cambering.
Yeah.
He said, feathering is what I was referring to. So his question is, what planes do you feather the edges on?
Oh, okay. Well, it's easier to say which ones I don't. I don't do my block plane. I wouldn't. Oh, here, let's label them or hold them up. I wouldn't do this. So this is called a rabbiting block plane. Blade's designed to go right to the edge, so you wouldn't want to feather that because you want the capacity of working right into a vertical edge.
It might be easier to say which ones you would.
No, which ones I wouldn't. I wouldn't do that one.
Looking at your till, there's only five planes that you would do it to.
I don't do the shoulder planes. I wouldn't do the skew block plane. And I don't do the regular block plane.
You don't do the router plane.
Well, I wouldn't think of that as...
What's a plane?
Yeah. So the number 8, yes.
plane?
The number 7, yes. The number 6, yes.
5.5.
Not on that little block plane. Yes on the 5.5. Not on the 10.25. Yes on the 4.5. Not on the scrub plane. Not on the butt mortise plane. I do it on the 85, but only if you're not using it to get right into a corner. That's actually that is a scraper plane. I do it on the 112, which is a large scraping plane. If you come over here, I don't do it on the block plane. I don't do it on the skew block plane. I don't do it on that little squirrel tail. As Jake mentioned, I don't do it on the router plane. I don't do it on any of the shoulder planes.
Chisel plane, you don't.
Chisel plane, I don't. Yeah, that's the only one over in there. Okay?
If it's not going to be used on a wide panel, it doesn't get that.
Yeah, I got to move some of this stuff over. Frick, throw my next question at me.
Kevin wants to know
who?
Kevin in the chat.
Kevin Burrs?
No, some other Kevin.
Another Kevin?
He wants to know who you recommend for stone manufacturers.
Sharpening stone manufacturers?
Yep.
Oh, there's only one. Sharpening. That's why we sell it. We don't. This, so you understand, we're not tool merchants. I guess we are, but that wasn't the intent. So we're not just selling stuff for the sake of selling it. We use what we sell what we use. And the reason I got into this business, I'll tell you that little story. I started representing, I failed at woodworking for a living because I had a lot of children and not a lot of customers. I started, excuse me, I was contacted by Tom Lee Nilsson wanting to know if I'd be interested in selling his tools in Canada. I thought it would be an interesting part-time gig. It ended up being full-time. As I started doing that, I met a lot of woodworkers because I would do the wood show circuit from Halifax to Victoria, which is one coast of Canada to the other. The people that were buying the tools really didn't know how to use them, sharpening in particular, dovetails. So there was definitely a need to teach them how. And as I did that, I would demonstrate with my own tools that had often been either made or modified by me. Tool manufacturers weren't too eager to make those modifications. I saw them as critical. You're teaching a 65-year-old who's just getting into this how to cut dovetails. Don't tell them it's going to take them 10 years of practice to get good at it, because that's not going to work. So I had developed things that would make it a lot easier, a lot quicker, and we could bring them up to speed in the first day. So since the manufacturers weren't interested, I had to figure out a way to do it myself. So we started with the dovetail saw, and that just led from one thing to another. When we realized that the tools that were being made and being sold at the time were remakes of tools that might have been 150 years old. And 150 years ago, the people that bought those tools were much younger. They were teenagers going into an apprentice program to learn to become a furniture maker or cabinet maker. There were no 65-year-old hobbyists to speak of. So the difference is a 16-year-old's got great eyesight, lots of flexibility and strength and everything else. You start to lose a lot of that when you're 65 and older. Nobody was taking that into account. So I developed a dovetail saw. That was the first. That had little wee tiny teeth on the front with a negative cutting face for the first 2 inches to make it easy to go in and start the cut so you could get it exactly where you wanted it. And that was the big breakthrough, because all of a sudden people were able to cut near perfect dovetails, as evidenced by Marshalls and Phillips on their first time doing it, which is unheard of, really. And then we just kept going from there, because there was always something that could be modified that would be made a little bit better. You know, a half-blind dovetail chisel. I wouldn't cut a half-blind dovetail without a chisel like that. It's so hard to get into the corners with something different.
Somebody was asking about how to sharpen the sides of that.
Okay, well, let me finish this. Okay. You could go start from one end and go to the other. Our new panel saws have thicker steel, far less set, cut laser straight. We'll demonstrate. Where were I going with this?
They were asking about your list of which stone manufacturers.
Yeah, right. So when it came to selling stones, because I remember saying to Tom Lee Nilsson, when the first question most common question I got, now back then everything was done on the phone. Customers say, well, what do you recommend to sharpen with? And I went to Tom, I said, well, why don't we find something? I had been using King stones. So King were Japanese-made stones, water stones, that I thought were great until we were introduced to Norton. And Norton was a manufactured stone that just cut a whole lot faster. I mean, it was 2 or 3 times the speed. They were great, and we sold a ton of them. And then in 2006, we were introduced to Sharpening. And I remember buying them, thinking they were terribly expensive, but I wanted to try them. Took them home, Took them to all my workshops that summer of 2006, and everybody loved it. And it was just like, this is great. This is awesome. So ever since then, I've been hooked on Sharpening because they cut fast, they last longer, they cut faster, and they give you the best edge you're going to get anywhere. I haven't seen anything compete with it. So I don't care about the price as long as the speed is there and the performance is there. If it would take me 45 minutes to get a perfect edge, that's too long. But if I can do it in half a minute, that's perfect. And yes, you pay for that, but shouldn't matter. Because your stones determine how all of these work. So if you think of that as an investment, your best money is spent on your stones. Next, Frick.
Quick question about the marking knife. This is from Zoe in the chat.
Hey, Zoe.
Your marking knife, do you sharpen that blade or do you just get a new one?
Is she talking about the sawtooth blade?
Either one you'd just replace.
The blade. Yeah, it's relatively inexpensive. I mean, I don't...
And it shouldn't dull. You would damage it before you dull.
Yeah. It's not something that gets... even if you cut dovetails every day, you're not using it a whole lot. Actually, let me rephrase that. The duller the sawtooth blade is, the easier it is to use. And its purpose is only just to get the faintest of a little curve, so it'll hold, your saw will stay in line, in that line. So I don't want that to be really sharp because it's too grabby. So that dull works actually better. And as far as the original blade,
nice.
That unless you damaged it, there'd be no reason to ever sharpen it. And I never wanted that to be too sharp either because it's too sharp, it's too easy to follow the grain. It's actually, if it's a little bit dull, it actually worked better. That's weird. Not often that you say that. Next, Frick.
Jess Kirk in the chat says...
Jess?
Well,
or
his
Jeff?
Username is Just Kirk.
Oh, Just Kirk.
At what point do you use power tools over hand tools?
Well, if you just do a pan around here real quick, show them what we have. We have Moose, he's a power tool. I have an 8-inch jointer over there.
Chop saw.
Oh yeah, I got the chop saw over there. So let me back up a little bit. Depends on what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll build something with just hand tools because I enjoy doing that. But most of the time I use both. So if I come in with a rough board, it needs to be cut to length, I'll go over to the chop saw. Maybe I'll use my own saw now. And I'll cut it to length. Then I go over to the jointer and I'll joint the bottom face and one edge. Then I send it through a thickness planer. That's a 14-inch thickness planer. And that will bring the top parallel to the bottom, nice and smooth. Then I come over to the table saw and I rip it to length and I use my sled to cross-cut it to length. So that's how I would prepare, and that's where I would use power tools. Then I would come over to my bench and I would get the final surface. I'm allergic to sanding, don't like it. That's when I would use my planes to get things perfect. I would use my plane to surface the top and the bottom and the edge. I would use my shooting board and my plane to get it dead nut square. Thank you, Paul. I would use all my saws for any of the joinery, with the exception of stuff that gets hidden. I don't cut dados by hand very often. That's easier done on the table saw. I guess my rule is if it's going to be seen, I want to do it by hand. The finished surface, the actual dovetail joints, the through wedge tenons, anything that's going to be seen, I prefer to do by hand. That should be a good answer. Next, Rick.
Mike in Powell, Tennessee.
Hey, Mike.
Says, I prefer to use my diamond plates and my superfine stone is a water stone. Since the final edge geometry is dependent on the final stone, what is wrong with that approach?
Okay, see, read it again, please.
I prefer to use diamond plates.
Diamond plates, okay. And diamond plates say they go up to 8,000 grit, but I don't believe it. Sorry. I've worked with the manufacturer, and yeah, 8,000 is usually coarser than their 4,000. But okay, diamond plates, yeah.
He says, my superfine stone is a water stone.
So a superfine stone is, if it's a water stone, they don't go beyond 8,000. Well, actually, there's a company now that I think is doing a 10,000, but that's typically an 8,000. Only the ceramics go up to 16, 30. Okay, Frick?
Since the final edge geometry is dependent on the final stone, what is wrong with that approach?
What do you mean by that, final edge geometry? Under a microscope, what you'd want to be looking at is you'd see your final bevel, we call it the tertiary bevel, and you'd want to see the polish on that would represent the finest scratch pattern you can get. So if it's an 8,000, it's going to be an 8,000. How you got to that it doesn't matter. The rest of the bevels, the surface quality doesn't matter. Then on the back side, your back bevel done by the Charlesworth ruler trick is going to also be done with your final stone. So that should have a scratch pattern of 8,000. And if you've got two 8,000 grit surfaces, the tertiary bevel and the back bevel meeting, that's what your cutting edge is going to be. If you're satisfied with that, that's fine. If you want to take it up a notch, then you got to go to the ceramics and trade that 8,000 grit those 8,000 grit surfaces in for 16,000 grit surfaces, and you'll notice a difference. You will definitely notice a difference. So I'm not sure where the word geometry fit in on that, but if you follow what I'm saying, as long as your two surfaces creating that apex are of the same grit pattern, in your case 8,000, then it's as good as it's going to get under that circumstance. Next, Rick. Should we break out the saws?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't sound so excited. All right, I'm going to show you what you can now get. And
well, almost.
Yeah, well, we had 80 of each. That lasted a day and a half, 2 days maybe. So we've been working. Should we take them over or we can't? Jake and I and Ian and Rick and Brandon. Ken, no?
I don't think Ken's.
So me and Jake and Ian and Rick and Brandon. So 5 of us have been busting our hiney, trying to get caught up and get more saws. Sometime next week we'll have more go on the site. Now this is the saw minus the logo, because I got one here with no, I don't have one. This is the crosscut. So
there is a crosscut over there.
Yeah, I know, it's brand new. If I use it, then somebody's not going to get a saw. These are my first ones. They just before we had Chris doing logo. By the way, big shout out to Chris. He's in Fredericton. One of their family pets or dogs they had to put down yesterday. So sorry to hear about that, Chris. I know in our house, animals become part of the family. Tough loss. There's my line. So I'd like to show, can I just grab it? I want to grab it because I want to show them what it looks like finished, but I'll use that one. You talk for a minute?
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about?
Imagine if somebody came onto the live right now. This is like that commercial break on the Merv Griffith show.
I could insert an ad.
What?
I could have inserted an ad.
Okay, yes, you could have. So here's how it comes in the box.
What's that?
This is going to be a second. There's a little, I don't even know what that is. We've got some seconds already, and they're all very minor. So here's the logo that Chris does for us. This is a 9-point cross cut. That means there's 9 points in every inch. Oh, Jake, don't split hairs.
9 per inch.
Whatever. Has 3/1000 of an inch set per side. That means each tooth sticks out just less than the thickness of a sheet of paper on either side. And comes with a guard on there, which is a pain in the butt to put back on, so I'm not going to. The handle's made out of the same material that our dovetail saw, all our other saws are. It's a composite. It's got aluminum in it. It's got fiberglass, all kinds of stuff. The blade is 35 thousandths of an inch thick. There are 4 split nuts that hold it in place, so it's nice and firm. The handle measures 7/8 of an inch in thickness.
15/16.
50 what?
It's 15/16.
What? It's 7/8, Jake. Where'd you get 15/16? 7/8. That's what I designed.
Well, why couldn't we? We were cutting the styrofoam over 3/8.
I don't know about that, but this is 7/8. It has our signature finger grips. Now, people ask why. Well, the idea is so that every time you pick up the saw, your hand is going in the exact same spot. And like sawing dovetails, eventually, this is going to become an extension of your hand, or as near as you can get to that, and that's going to make you more accurate with it. Resharpenable, obviously. And blades are nice and straight, and if they are not, you can easily bend them and bring them back. It's spring steel. Luther posted the Rockwell hardness of being somewhere between 55 and 60. I think that's actually a bit high. Would make it difficult to sharpen. And we're going to set this down so it doesn't get dirty. And I've got it soaked in camellia oil because I don't want it showing up at your house with any rust on it. So just wipe it down. It's non-toxic. So secure the piece of wood well with your hand. I grab it like this. I use my thumb as a means of starting the saw. This is a piece of walnut. Try to use as much of the blade as you can. This means you won't have to sharpen as often. It's the turtle that won the race, not the rabbit. So you see how nice and straight? Look at the red line that I'm following. The nice thing about narrow set is it doesn't allow the blade to wobble, and you don't have to steer it. You just have to start it in the right spot, and once you get going, it's going to go on. It's going to continue on that line. So that's a real advantage. Now, why is that important? You're not going to leave the surface from the saw, but you are going to go over to the shooting board and clean it up. So the better your cut, the less you're going to have to clean up. Now this is the rip. So the rip, obviously the only difference is down the bottom corner, it'll say 7-point rip. So 7 teeth per inch, same amount of set. Everything else is identical, same handle, so you're always holding it the same way. If I'm going to rip, I'm securing the board, keeping it close to the edge of my horse. Same idea. Use all of the blade, slow and steady. Nice and straight. See how nice and straight that is? Last saw you'll ever have to buy. And we did that because you can't get one anymore. I think there's one company making good hand saws, but the waiting list was something like 6 months or more. Lee Nelson stopped doing them. They only did them for a short time. I still don't know why, but okay. Any questions on that? Fire away. In the meantime, I'm going to show, in response to Sue's question on using our scraper prep tools on getting your scraper blade. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but I'll demonstrate it. That one's already been done. So here's a brand new one. So we have, this one hasn't been done. We have Chris grind the edges so that they come to you nice and straight and close to being polished. So the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to come in here and remove the grinding scratches. So like a plane blade, you want the two surfaces. Hold on just 1 second. Hey, shh. That lasted all of a second. Like a plane blade, you want the two surfaces that make the cutting edge polished to the same level. So I need this surface polished, and I need this surface polished, but I don't need all the way back to here. I just need right up here. So that's where the ruler trick's going to come in. First of all, we're going to do that. So
you have the tool for it?
Yep. You're going to want lubricate your stone.
You've got that burr setting jig in there. It's made out of that MDF. I don't know if it's the waterproof stuff.
Burr setting? You mean that?
Yeah.
It's a piece of pine.
Oh, okay. I thought it was MDF.
So I need to hold that at right angles to the stone. So we make these jigs out of torrefied maple. And torrefied doesn't absorb moisture, so it's not going to change on you. I don't want it to be metal because I don't want metal running over my stone. Now, it's going to be wood and it's going to wear somewhat, but you can go to your shooting board and square it up when you need to. So what I do is actually I hold it like this. So this gives me lots of surface area to keep that nice and straight or plumb. And by squeezing the blade against this, I'm holding that plumb. Now, as I'm going forward and back, you'll notice that I'm rotating so that I'm not working in one area. Like if you did this, you're working in one little area of your stone. But if you rotate like that, now I'm using almost all of the stone. And you go through this until when you look at the edge, you see, and sometimes you're going to want some magnification. That's where my magnifiers come in handy. You'll do that until you see a scratch pattern that is the same. And although you've never seen that before prior to doing this, it's quite easy to identify. If you see dull spots and shiny spots, you know you don't have it. When it's all the same, and it'll look nice and crisp. Best way I can describe it for you. You're going to go from your 1,000. It's actually such a small area. You could go right up to your 16,000. Do the same thing, holding it like this, and lubricated stone. Do that until when you flip it over, you now have a nice mirror polish right along that edge. Once you've done that, now we're going to go in and we're going to do this part. And in doing this part, most all the articles ever written about preparing a scraper blade have you holding it like this and using your fingers like that. Well, you know what? That blade is 20 thou thick. And that's going to leave you a shiny spot underneath each fingertip because this is just too thin to just dissipate the pressure from your fingers when they're spread that far apart. So what we decided to do was we took another piece of torrefied maple. We put magnets in there and we put it on there like so, but we made it shorter or narrower than the stone, than the blade, sorry. Now when we put our ruler on there and set that down, the pressure I'm going to apply with my hand is going to go about 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, and it's going to cause that last 1/4 inch to somewhat straighten out. So what you do, or what you'll end up with, is just a little polished strip, and you're not really changing the angle at all, not that it would be a big deal, but it concentrates all the pressure right out there on that edge. And I move it forward, I move it side to side a little bit, not much. And you would do that until you go in, and you'll end up with a matte gray color that runs corner to corner. I didn't make it all the way, but it takes a little bit longer than that. And once you've got that matte gray color that goes end to end, then you're just going to move up through your grits until you're at a 16,000 here. So you'll end up with a polished strip here and a polished on the edge. And of course, if you're doing it, you may as well do this one and this one and this one. And if you want, you can do this one and this one and this one and this one. Gives you 8 surfaces that you can work with. And these are they make it so it's really duplicatable. Now, one last little thing. We don't sell this, but you can make it. So what I did is I took a piece of pine, and depending on how aggressive you want your hook to be, I put it in there like that. Now, this is parallel to the bench. Now, I used to...
You have it? No, you got one right there.
Where? I do. The third element of this, one is the edge, one is the side, the next one is the burnisher. If you're using a screwdriver or a rough piece of metal, any of that you've just eliminated that nice, highly polished two surfaces that you used or created. So you want your burnisher to be equally polished. Well, I tell the story of the untold hours, see Moose? Untold hours that I spent polishing this up and getting it ready to use. I don't like round burnishers. They're easier to deal with because because you can put them in the lathe to polish them. But the problem is, if you think of the contact surface, it's very, very small. So if you're pushing down unevenly, you actually may put little divots in there. I like the idea of a wide burnisher because it distributes the pressure that you're applying to a wider surface area, and you're not going to end up with that. But rather than go through all the hassle of dealing with creating that, I'm sitting there looking at my tool tray and thinking, realizing I've got flat pieces of highly polished hardened steel on every one of my chisel backs. So I just put a piece of tape around the end of the chisel just to protect me from that. And I set it like that, so that maintains the angle all the way. And you go out to one end, back to the other. Put a little bit of oil on just to lubricate it. Now, as I said, I have two of these. 1 5/16, 1 1/8, I got 1 1/4 and whatever. And all that means is that the angle that you're going to be meeting the edge of the scraper is going to vary from this to that. So it's going to give you either a really strong, a really heavy hook or a light hook. Don't apply too much pressure. You do both sides. I would dress this and do all 8 edges if I was going to work the ends as well. And now you have a very effective tool for coming in and cleaning up particularly dense, very dense exotic woods. And it does a wonderful job on them. We always demonstrate it at the end, the last things we do with them. We have our class here, the Purple Art class. And we had some Vera wood, and we were taking off shavings that were almost the width of the scraper itself, and they were so light, you'd almost disintegrate holding them. They'd hold their shape, but as soon as you touch them, they almost fell apart. Anyway, fun. They get really hot. Don't burn your thumbs. Next, Rick.
All right, this one's from Michael in New York.
Hey, Michael.
Sometimes I find a burr on the back of my plane blade prior to sharpening. I remove it before sharpening, but wonder if I'm doing something wrong, either planing or sharpening.
You find a burr on the back of your plane blade
Prior to sharpening.
Prior to sharpening. Well, I'm not sure where it came from, but I mean, whether you take it off now or at the end of your sharpening procedure, it shouldn't matter. And of course, the ultimate test is, how does the tool perform on a piece of wood when you've sharpened it? You know, you see people that use their fingernail, they shave their arm with it. I stopped doing that a long time ago because it gave me a rash. But really, the performance test is on the piece of wood. So even though it takes a little bit longer to assemble your plane, that's ultimately going to tell you how well of a job you've done. So I don't think you're doing anything wrong, just as long as you don't have a burr before you put the plane to the wood. Next, Rick.
Larry in Arizona says,
hey, excuse me just a second. How are we going to know how much is raised if Luther's not on?
Luther's going to give us update.
Oh, is he? Okay.
Yeah.
we're working on a real-time tracker. Yeah, so everybody can see.
What's that mean?
Like, it'll show in the corner what our current donations are.
Oh, does it? Oh,
Well,
we're
it doesn't-
working
it-
on it. Oh,
yeah.
oh.
We're
have
trying
it
to
yet.
figure it out.
Okay, sorry, I interrupted you. Next.
Larry from Arizona says, I know Rob says to sharpen when dull. For a light use panel saw, what would a reasonable frequency be? Once a year or twice a year?
Oh, this is one of those, how long does a tank of gas last? Well, there's so many variables, right? You drive, how hard you drive, how fast you drive, how quickly you accelerate. So when it comes to a saw, if you're sawing softwoods versus sawing hardwoods, if you're sawing hardwoods that have a lot of silica in them, if you're, and again, the amount that you're using, if you're sawing all the time.
I wouldn't think once a year.
Oh, well, I mean, I just...
He said he's trying to qualify it for light use. How often? And I don't think that it would be once a year. How often would you sharpen the saws that we would use in the classes? And that would be...
Oh, they should be sharpened every couple classes. But then we had 4 saws. We had 2 crosscuts and 2 rips. And everybody, and 14 people using them.
I mean before this. Before our saws were in use. I mean, we did 20-some classes with the other saws. How many times did you have them sharpened? Maybe once?
I don't know. But what you want to... the best way to answer that question is to know what it cuts like when it's sharp and to know what it cuts like when it's dull. And you get addicted to sharp. And learning how to sharpen so it's not such a big deal. Crosscut or a rip saw is really easy to sharpen. We've done a video on that. We'll do another one. So it's like a plane blade. You know, you have what I would call, your finishing phase. You've just taken the blade off the stone and you're planing and it's just flawless. It's shiny. And then you've got what Chris Schwartz labeled working dull. It'll still remove a shaving, but it's a little harder to push. You don't get that perfect finish, but it's still usable. Well, the faster you learn how to sharpen, the faster you will be, the more you're going to want to stay with that blade up here as opposed to down here. So learn to sharpen your saw and you'll realize, see, I want it to be nice and sharp every time I use it. So I would think if you were building a piece of furniture and you're only using your saws to break down from rough material, you'd go several months. Let's throw a ballpark out and say every 6 months. Next, Rick, please.
Yeah, I have one here. 608 Woodworks in the chat says, do you think softwood is a good choice for a bench top to absorb impact from tasks like chiseling, or would maple or hickory be a better choice?
No, you don't want softwood for a bench top. Maple gets beat up pretty bad. If you look at my bench, and I take care of my bench, but no, softwood's not designed for a bench top. You just don't want your bench top riddled with dents right out of the gate. The exception of that would be yew. Pacific yew is a coniferous, a softwood, but it's relatively hard. Where's my chart, Jake? Is it right here?
Yeah.
I got it. Could you keep it down to a dull roar out here, boys? Huh? Okay. Here we are. Pacific yew. So this is a softwood, and it's at 1,600. Maple's 1,450. So that would certainly qualify as a wood you could use for your bench. If you talk about down here, pine. So sugar pine, eastern white pine, 380, really low, way too soft. Now I'm looking for southern yellow. I wonder what the other name for it is, because I don't think it actually listed on here.
Oh, it's called.
What?
Just a second. Longleaf.
Longleaf pine?
Yep.
I got shortleaf.
Loblolly.
Loblolly? No, I can't spot it right away. But I would want to stay. I would want to stay above the 1200
It's in
range.
the 800 range.
800, really? I would have thought it would be harder than that. So you want to be. You get up here in the 1200, and just to give you some idea of what woods that are Osage orange is 2600. Remember, you got to actually work with it too, so you don't want it too hard. Pecan is 1800. Hard maple is 1450. Madrone's 1460. Honey locust is 1580. Yew is 1600. Black locust is 1700. Hornbeam is 1780. You know, anything up in there is going to be plenty hard for a bench, and not terribly hard in terms of having to work it or being able to work it. Beech is actually fairly low. Now they use European beech is common for benches. I'll see if I can find that. Beech. Jake, can you look it up? You got
American or European?
Well, do the American first.
American is 13.
13? Really? Oh yeah, it's right there. So here's your hard maples at 1450, American beech is at 1300, and European beech
is the same as maple.
European ash, European beech 1450. Yeah, it is same as ash. Same as maple, I mean. So good range to be in. Just stay away from the pines. I used, when I built this, I wanted, the accent wood was going to be mahogany, but I didn't have access to 12-quarter mahogany for the base. So whoever I got it from said, well, this is the same color, and it's a Spanish cedar, and it's faded. It's actually gotten lighter, but it's way too soft. I mean, every little time you touch it with anything, it shows a big ding, so that was a bit of a mistake. Strong enough, but just not hard enough, especially down on the bottom where things are always knocking into it. Next, Rick.
Tim says.
Tim.
Oh wait, I'm on mute. Tim says, any tips for holding a spoke shave blade while sharpening?
Yep.
Also, Rob doesn't really ever seem to use a spoke shave. Is there any reason for that?
Where are you going?
I'm going to get that little pair of vice.
Are they there?
Huh?
Are they there?
Yeah.
Side question, do you know where you got that wood hardness chart?
Wood database.
Wood database. For Clint, who asked, or anyone else who's wondering.
So the question is on sharpening spoke shaves. And you're right, I don't use them a ton. I do, it's, when are they called for? The last time I used a spoke shave a lot would have been
Building that,
shaker bench.
yeah, with the ash spokes.
Yeah. So here's the problem. You got this little wee tiny blade trying to hold on to. So just take a little pair of vice grips like that. And now you've got something to hold. So you can go in. Get your burr, come over to your finer stone, come up a little bit higher, and I use a ruler trick on it as well. Now, when you use the ruler trick, obviously you're not going to go from one side of the stone to the other. So I stay just about like that and just move forward and back. Oh shoot, I shouldn't have done that. That was already polished. Anyway, the little vice grips make it a lot easier. And now I also use them, since I showed you that. What am I doing? That's bevel down. I also use those vice grips for holding. And this is a plane I'd recommend you pick up. I use it quite a bit. That little squirrel tail. It just comes in extremely handy. It's one you can put in your apron pocket and not even know it's there. But it has a tiny blade, which makes it extremely hard to hold on to. So same idea. Just get a pair of small vice grips, and now you've got something to use as a handle. Works great. Next, Frick.
Are
we running out of questions?
Well, the ones that were sent in, yeah. Looking for some in the chat. This one was from earlier, Mark Patterson.
Hey, Mark.
Can you please demonstrate the proper grip when using the ruler trick on the back of the plane blade? I am tearing up my fingertips trying to set up my first hand plane.
Okay. So a brand new blade, and the ruler trick. So if you have our rule, we now have them longer. There's no serrations in them, so it's a little bit easier to use. We're working on a little device that will allow this to stay in place so you don't have to hold it, but the problem is that you usually have to hold on to it with your other hand. So what I do is I've got my finger here. I've got 3 fingers holding the blade. Index finger putting pressure in the middle. Thumb putting pressure on this side but also grabbing that corner. Middle finger putting pressure on the opposite side and also grabbing that corner. So when I'm holding this, these 2 fingers are also helping me steer it. Now, I've got my palm on the behind my pinky resting on the blade here. I've got my pinky riding the edge of the stone down underneath. And the reason I do that is so that I don't fishtail when I'm going forward and back. It allows me to do it relatively quickly and keep it in line. If you're trying to do it like that, you're all over the place. But just drop that pinky down, and it's actually my pinky nail that's running on the side of the stone. And you don't have to go fast. You can go slow so you have a little more control. This keeps the blade, the ruler in place. Just like that. Shoot.
Well, I was going to say something, but I didn't clue in.
Wish you had of.
I didn't clue in until you'd already rubbed it a couple times.
So I just took a blade that's already finished and I just made my back bevel rough again. So now I got to go through and redo it on the 16,000 grit stone. What I'm thinking. Anyway, that's how you do it. It's easy. It's easy. Go slow at first, just until you get the hang of it, and then you can add a bit of speed to it as you go along. Got to say hello to Angie. So Angie is Ken Anthony. Now Ken's on tonight. I think he said his camp. Ken is just recently turned 70. He manages our production shop, and this is his cousin, Angie. She and her sister, Lynn, do all of our t-shirts. They pack them up for us, and you can see her there with her big smile. She works hard, and we appreciate it. So big shout out to you ladies. And Ken. What else am I forgetting, Frick? Oh, got a nice picture today of Stella with her arms out to Angie, who's been praying for her. Stella was Jack Lane, who is our bench brigade. We don't call him a Master Chief. What do we call him?
Brigadier General.
Brigadier General? Well, it has to be higher than Luther. Jack manages the bench brigade, so he corrals well over 300 volunteers in half a dozen or more countries that have made benches and delivered them to over 100 vets literally around the world. And his great-granddaughter was born at just 20 weeks,
I think she was 21.
21 weeks, a couple of years ago. So she was the length of your hand, and she survived. So there's a picture of her all grown up. And we'd share it with you if I had it, but I don't know if I can. Frick might be able to.
Yeah, I'll get it up
Thank
before
you.
we finish.
What's next, Frick?
He says that we've delivered over 100 benches. Not
Yeah.
sure exactly how many, but
Yeah, well, we're working on the last, we've had 4 classes already this year. And class number 5 is the last week of September, and class number 6 is the 3rd week of October. That'll add another 14 benches to the list. Big shout out to all the Bench Brigade members. You're awesome for what you do, and you know why you do it. That's why they always come back and want to do another one. And then we have Jim Merzetti up in Moncton, who takes care of the Eastern Canadian side of our requirements. And because we're based here, we're having more and more local vets, or local combat wounded vets in our program as we get a little bit of traction. Thank you to the guys that have already been here and have spread the word, because we certainly didn't get any help from the government. Why would you expect them? Oh, never mind. Go ahead, Frick.
this one comes from Thorfinn in the chat. He says, "Hi Rob, how do I straighten a shooting board ledge or track, which is plywood and hard to reach with hand tools?"
So I'm going to guess and say,
Just do both.
oh, you mean, yeah. So there's 2 edges that I need to be straight. Straight is defined as the shortest distance between 2 points. So if in using your shooting board, I hate pulling this one out because I always get all the questions, why are there so many holes? If this isn't straight, then this is going to pivot, right? It's going to wiggle like that. That will not work. If this isn't straight, then when you're shooting the end of your board, it's going to move like this, and that's not going to work. So this has to be straight, this has to be straight.
And they need to be square to each other.
Yeah, so let's do this one first. Now, if I had a bump in there, this is how I would do it. I would use my 10 1/4. 10 1/4, the blade goes all the way to both sides. So I would set that on there, and I would go in, and I would first, with a straight edge, I would isolate where the bump is. And with a very light pass, I would go in and I would take care of that bump so that when I put my straight edge on there, it now makes contact. And sight alone is not good enough. So what I would do is I would take my straight edge. Jake, where's, it's there. And a feeler gauge. Is that one right there? What is this?
No, it's like a 6.
I would take my feeler gauge, and usually the thinnest you're going to find is 1.5 thou, which I suppose is good enough for what we're doing here. And I would put that in there. Make sure there's no debris first. This is a good question. I don't think we've been asked this before, have we?
No.
Want me to show them the bottom
Here.
side of, yeah, this is what I want right here. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to just scrape away any gunk. Then I would go in with my feeler gauge, and I would trap that, and I'd want to make sure that when I push it in, that there is resistance everywhere. You can tell if it's tight and if it's not tight. Once I have that nice and straight, then I'm going to come in and I'm going to use my, put a plane in there. Now I need a reliable square. You don't have to go out and buy the Starrett. This is a 12-inch steel square, solid steel Starrett square, and this is about $800 new. I bought this used. $900? We sell one made by PEC that's,
100?
I think with a 1 thou shim it's the same, and it's $100. I would go in and I need that to be square. And again, I would check it with my shim. But we're dealing with a bump. So how are we going to get rid of a bump? Well, we're going
You're
to,
literally, or you're saying?
no,
for the example?
if we had a bump, we got to get rid of the bump. But I kind of want to do both things at once. If this part's high and this part's low, and I've got a bump here, then I'm going to fix everything up to this point. I don't want to remove any material from here. If this part's low, when I put my square on, I've got a bump here, and it's faulty from here out, then I don't want to touch this, and I'm going to start here, and I'm going to remove that material. So I would do the same thing. I would use my bench rabbet, and I would plane along there until I got that corrected, checking it with a straight edge and checking it with the square. If you don't have that, you can use a shoulder plane. It'll do the same job. Not quite as much mass, but it'll still do the job. If you don't have that, you could use a rabbet plane, a rabbeting block plane. And again, a little less, the sole's not as long, but it's still doable. So any kind of a plane that gives you access to the edge, you'll be able to go in and fix that problem. But get this first. Let this be your standard. This has to be nice and straight. And then I would work my fence to that. And at the same time you're straightening this, you need to be aware that it's square to this. Okay? Good question. Now, just a little plug. We just got new packaging for our shooting boards. We sell shooting boards. And we have Wonder Willie makes us steel jigs so that when we glue up and we build our shooting boards, we use that jig on every one, and it's guaranteed that that will be square to this. And we make sure that that edge is nice and straight, there's no bumps in it. And we make sure that this edge is nice and straight, there are no bumps in it. So when you buy it from us, it's ready to go. Next, Frick.
Doswell Pierce in Mineral, Virginia.
What's his first name?
Doswell.
Doswell? Howdy.
You want the same 3 bevels on a block plane as you do on your 5.5.
Sorry, say that again?
You want the same 3 bevels on a block plane as you do on your 5.5.
Yeah. Back bevel. Well, he's probably talking primary bevel, secondary bevel, tertiary bevel. There's actually 4. You got a back bevel as well. But yeah, the only thing different is I don't put the feathering on the block plane. Everything else is done the same. Nice thing about that is you get very good at sharpening your plane blades, and you don't have to, it's the same technique for all of them. So master that one technique and you're good to go. Next, Frick.
Mike Johnson, Woodridge, Illinois.
Woodridge, I used to teach the woodcraft store frequently.
Is it worth practicing sharpening on a cheaper chisel or plane blade before I invest the money in a more expensive one? I want to learn how to sharpen, but don't want to permanently damage the tools. Thanks for all the work you do with vets. From a vet.
Thank you, sir. If you're in the woodcraft store, tell Carl that Rob said hello. I would gird up your loins, fresh courage take, and learn on your good one. Why waste all that time and effort on a cheap chisel that's not going to serve you well? You're not. Chances of ruining it are pretty slim. There's not too much you can do.
I can't really think of anything you could do to ruin it.
Anything you did, could be repaired. I would just get a good chisel, and you're going to invest the time to do it. The reward at the end is you've done it to a chisel that you're going to keep. It's going to perform well. And besides that, cheap chisels are usually in the worst possible condition when you buy them. They're nowhere near flat, lousy steel. So you put all that work and effort into it and it won't hold an edge. So don't waste your time. I never would. I get people say this a lot, you know, I'm going to get the cheap stuff until I get better. Well, the chances are that the cheap stuff is going to discourage you from getting better. I would not recommend that route. When you have the least skill, you need the most advantages, and the better tools provide those advantages. You can do it. Next, Rick.
Margaret in the chat says, Rob, what grit do you sharpen your marking tools up to? Wheel marking gauge, panel gauge, and marking knives.
I used to polish the marking gauge cutters up to 16,000. I don't anymore. Just because it doesn't make a difference on something like that. So I probably, in fact, if you want a reason to buy something, what are you doing, Frick?
I'm working in my new ball glove.
We sell 2 different versions of our diamond plate. The premium and the standard. The premium is the best one for sharpening plane blades and preparing chisels. The standard is how much cheaper, Jake?
$80.
$80 cheaper?
$70. It's $110.
It's great for doing all those kinds of things. And 1,000 grit is plenty for everything that you mentioned. Read the list again, what she said, just in case I didn't.
She said marking gauge, panel gauge, and marking knives.
Yeah. Yeah, all of those, 1,000 grit is plenty. Plenty. And it's the nice thing about that diamond plate is you can't destroy it. You know, and when you're talking about sharpening small edges like a marking knife, easy to dig in on a softer stone like a water stone or a ceramic stone, but on the diamond stone you don't have to worry about it. It's really good. And you can do router bits. You can do just about anything, any carbide you can sharpen on that. It's a really good piece of kit.
Including primary bevel
On
that diamond stone.
Oh yeah, I know, but who wants to do a primary bevel? It's too much
No,
work.
no. I mean, for sharpening just your primary bevels on your hand planes, even on your chisels, that stone is good for that as well.
You mean instead of a bench grinder?
No. Sharpening.
Why are you saying primary bevels?
Like your secondary bevel, like working on.
Well, you just said primary bevel. That's
I know.
what you're throwing me.
I know.
Oh yeah.
But in just sharpening your tools, it is fine. What
Yeah.
it's not good for is flattening the backs
On
of
your chisel backs, you need it to be flat over its length, really flat, and that's where the standard one is not. It can be out 3 or 4 thou, whereas the premium one is under a thou and a half. So yes, you could do it if you didn't have to do if you weren't having to do your chisels for the first time, then I would say you can go with the standard stone. Save yourself $70. Next, Frick.
Mike Evans.
Hey, Mike.
Says, how does Rob sharpen curved surfaces such as carving tools?
Well, I don't do very much carving. I had Chris Pye here one time, and we did some videos on it. So there's one called what's the title of it?
Wood carving with Chris Pye.
Wood carving. Yeah.
Part 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. Number 1. Get that. That's as good as you're going to find. That's another area where that diamond stone is really good because carving chisels, you have relatively small surfaces. So that if you're using that on a water stone, you're going to really wear the stone in that one area. Whereas the diamond plate does not suffer the same way. So I would highly recommend that particular stone for carving chisels. Next, Rick.
Why not strope or whatever that word is?
Strop?
Yeah.
Well, the short answer is I need to go from dull to sharp. And my version of sharp is you can then apply a finish after you've run it over with the plane, meaning that surface is going to be better than sandpaper will provide. So how do I get from there, from dull to there, in the quickest, least cumbersome way? My system is 2 stones, 1,000 grit and a 16,000 grit. The total time, including flattening the stones, is a half a minute. And the surface you get after a half a minute is such that you could do this surface with it, and this surface you could play around and spend another 45 minutes on the sharpening process, but you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. In other words, what a half a minute will do is equal to what you could spend 50 minutes doing. You don't gain anything. So, why not strop? It's an extra step that I don't think is necessary because it's not going to improve the edge. It has a tendency to round, which I don't like. Fine, it's the procedure you use on carving chisels, but on doing flat work with a plane or with a bench chisel, you want surfaces to be flat, you want edges to be straight. And honing, not honing, what's the word we used? Stropping on leather with an abrasive takes away from that flat. You cannot maintain the nice flat back if you're stropping the back. My opinion. So no, I don't strop. Next, Frick, please.
Do you touch up your carbide tools at your shop, or do you send them out?
Well, we send all our plane blades out. Router bits, we probably replace them and buy new ones, usually when we're done with the router bit. It's the problem with the router bit, especially if it has a bearing on it, is the first time you sharpen it, it's no longer the same profile. That changes. So I consider quarter round bits to be one-time use, meaning once they're dull the first time, you go get them sharpened, they're not going to be performed the same way they were when they were new. I have been in situations where I had to touch them up because we didn't have a new one, and I used the diamond plate to do that. I can't think, is there any other carbide tool that we use? I know I've taken, when we make our marking gauges and we're literally turning by hand the brass and the swanstone, we use easy wood turning tools, which are carbide inserts. And you can resharpen them by laying them face down on a diamond plate and honing the face. And I've done that before as well. But typically, any of the other carbide, your chiclets. Where do we have carbide in here? We have carbide chiclets in the thickness planer and on the jointers, and they're all replaceable. Typically don't sharpen them.
You can't usually.
Saw blades and router bits is the only other carbide that I can think of that we use.
Can you over sharpen a tool?
Over sharpen?
Yeah.
You can waste time. My feeling on cutting edges is you bring them to a point where going beyond, you bring them to a point where you can no longer detect with the unaided eye or hand an improvement in the surface. So if a 16,000 grit will produce a surface that you can't see room for improvement, going beyond that is a waste of time. It's law of diminishing return kicks in, and you're spending time, but you're not getting anything for it. So if you want to call that over sharpening. And I'll throw something else in there too. The single biggest problem we probably see when we're teaching sharpening is guys spend too long at it. And if you're freehand sharpening and you spend too much time, fatigue sets in, and now you start to rock, and that nice flat bevel all of a sudden becomes a radius, and that's problematic. So most people, when they're learning, spend too much time when less time will actually do a better job. And that all has to do with fatigue and being able to hold the angle. You're very limited in how long you can hold the angle. Next, Frick. You scraping the barrel here or what?
Yeah. Just bought a number 5 Stanley, but I think the bottom is not real flat. Can I do something to fix it? Thanks, Kirby from Moose Jaw.
Hey, Kirby from Moose Jaw. Another Canadian. Yes, a number 5 is within range. I wouldn't try to flatten anything beyond a 5.5, just because you've got such a long surface and you're applying downward pressure with your hands, front and back. Did he say bought a new Stanley?
Where did I see that?
If it's a brand new Stanley, I wouldn't have done that. If it's an old Stanley that's salvageable, that's good, that's a different story. I produced a video entitled "The Great Hand Plane Revival." You can buy the video, or you can buy the what do we call it, on demand off the website, and that goes through the entire process of taking a plane, an old Stanley, and bringing it up so it'll perform like one of the ones behind me. But yes, you can do it. We use, and we now sell it, we use a sandpaper made by Porter Cable that has a sticky back, self-adhesive. You need a known flat surface. So don't just run out and grab any piece of glass. It has to be float glass. Float glass is flat, plate glass isn't. Or a known granite reference surface. And you don't use too coarse of a grit. I find the finer grits actually cut better than the really coarse grits. So if you went with like a 220, and you just lay that sandpaper out on your flat glass or your granite block, a couple of rows, it's about 3.5 inches wide. So if you do 2 strips, it just means you can get more work done without having to stop and change the paper. You can't expect it to last forever. You want to keep the paper clean. It clogs up and stops cutting. So either have a vacuum or a spray. You're probably better off with a vacuum, just to vacuum off the metal filings. And you want to keep the pressure. You want to keep the pressure right down the middle of the plane. So you got to be conscious of what you're doing, that you're applying the same amount of pressure front and back. I would have the blade in place, lever cap, pressure on, blade pulled up, obviously. That way you're flattening it under the working load of the lever cap. And the distortion will be minimal, but it's still going to be there. And yeah, just frequently check. So yeah, you can do it. You can do it. The video we did covers all of this stuff in great detail. It talks about doing the face of the frog. It talks about doing the contact points. It goes into... before we had Wood River planes, we had about a 2-year period where the next best option was to salvage an old Stanley. So we went and I taught that class several hundred times, various locations. We'd always take somebody's plane out of the audience and we would do that. The class would be me taking that plane and fixing it, and we never didn't have a success story at the end. Next.
Can you show sharpening a gouge, spindle gouge, bowl gouge?
Is somebody asking?
Yeah.
Gouge off the lathe. Yeah. So there's your bowl gouge, and I would probably, this is going to be the best. Shoot, what's that doing over there?
It's what doing where?
The blade, the belt.
No, don't move it.
Why?
That's what we had a hard time with.
No. It's cutting in. Hello, Bentley. This is probably 120 grit, which is fine. So you're going to do a big arc like this. So find your flat.
So they could do this on a grinder?
Well, it's a little harder on a grinder just because of the way you got to hold your hand. All the work's being done with the right hand. I want to keep these at the same height. Want to keep the bevel angle the same, so the angle between this angle wants to be the same the whole time. Feel for a burr on the inside. I'm a little out of shape. That's a little bit too high. So I'll bring that down a little bit. I can't tell you the last time I turned a bowl. All of my turning is spindle work now. I'm out of shape, so if you watch that bevel, you'll see how it's a little bit uneven. But I still got a good edge. I can feel the burr in there, and I wouldn't even bother taking the burr off. Now, you can do it on a disc sander as well. The nice thing about this is I've got a place to rest my hand, and I can do it. The difficulty over here is you don't quite have the same surface area. I suppose I could lay it like that. Yeah, I could do it there and do it like this. Yeah. I was taught by Dale Nish. He may not be happy to have me say that after so many years of not doing it, but I use my, this is a spindle gouge, an M2. And I do that the same way. I use this one a little bit more, but I use my scooches a little more than anything else now, just because of what I'm doing. Same idea. So you're maintaining this angle the same through the whole thing, and you're rotating, rolling it up like that, down here and up like that. You might want to do some dry runs before you actually turn the machine on. Get the hang of it. Now, there's a jig made by One Way, but you can do it freehand. Just, again, if you screw it up, you can square it off and start over. Next, Frick. How many?
One giveaway.
Huh?
One giveaway.
One? Next, Frick.
What treatment do you put on your workbench, and how often do you treat it? That's from Dana in Elkview.
Hey, Dana. I use tung oil. It's actually a tung oil product. Luther would go on about how it's not true tung oil, but I don't care. It's called tung oil. Made by circa 1850. Here it is over here. And apparently you can get it in the U.S. as well. I've used it for a long time and I like it. When I'm doing the bench top, which needs to be done again, by the way, I'll thin that down probably 10 or 15% paint thinner, Varsol, just to slow the drying down a little bit and make it go a little bit easier. And yeah, I don't remember the last time I put a coat on there. The only purpose of the oil is just to keep glue from sticking to the bench top and to try to even out the absorption and exhausting of moisture. But that's what I use.
Okay.
It's only 5.2. You need more questions, Frank?
Not really.
Big Bad Brad.
Big Brad who?
Judge. Brad, the judge.
Oh, Brad, the judge. Your Honor.
He said, why is it necessary to polish the back of a chisel if you get it flat with a 1000 grit?
Well, your cutting edge is only as good as the lesser of the two surfaces. So if you think about the back with 1000 grit scratches and the bevel with 16,000 grit scratches, you're still going to have that ragged edge under magnification, of course. That ragged edge is a result of the gouges of the the 1000 on the back. So as you polish it, those gouges, they're still gouges, are much smaller and they match the bevel. So you're going to get a smoother surface. Same as sandpaper. You know, what's the difference between stopping at 120 grit and stopping at 320 grit? The size of the gouges. And it actually changes the look of the wood too. So, and it'll cut better. The finer the edge, the better it will cut, meaning it will cut with less effort. Less effort expended means you have greater control. The harder you have to push, the less control you have. So sharp tools are the safest.
Okay, let's do our draws.
Okay, so we're giving away 3 dead cats and that big cutting board. Thanks to David. It's got nice rubber feet on there too. Keep it in place. Okay, let's do the 3 dead cats first.
All right, we ready?
Yep.
First dead cat is going to Henry Woolridge in Missouri.
Henry, Missouri. It's too warm for a dead cat right now, but you wait a few months. Congratulations.
Actually, I'm going to pick the next 2.
You need to contact us so we know what size you want.
Yep, support at RobCosman.com. The next 2 winners are, just says Peter in the USA. We have his email, so.
Peter, somewhere in the US of A.
Yep.
Hopefully in a climate that would be conducive to a dead cat.
And Gene Dixon in South Carolina.
And Gene. South Carolina is too hot and humid right now, but just wait. On those cool fall evenings, it'll be perfect. Who are we giving this nice big walnut cutting board? It's really nice. I was quite impressed when I saw it. David was here. David was is retired EOD, Navy EOD, stands for Explosive Ordnance Disposal. And he was here last year. Last August, a year ago. Wow.
It's going to Jerry Frank in Delaware.
Hey, Jerry, you'll love it. Okay, is that it?
Yep.
We back in 2 weeks?
No.
Oh, 3 weeks.
3 weeks because of you again?
Because of me. Sorry.
3 weeks. Save your pennies so you can help contribute to our Purple Heart project. We certainly appreciate it. Please spread the word. We have a website that's donated. It's called thepurpleheartproject.org. And that is the official Purple Heart website, and it's got all the stories of all the vets, has their before and after pictures, and lots of information on there. Luther worked hard, so make sure you leave a comment and say, oh, this is a wonderful site. All right, thanks to everyone. Appreciate your support. We'll see you guys in 3 weeks' time.